The photograph slipped from Willa Vincent's trembling fingers, landing face up on the polished mahogany desk as she stared at the man who had just walked into her small documentary studio with an offer that seemed too generous to be real. "You want to fund my entire project?" Willa asked, her voice catching slightly. "The documentary about forgotten immigrant stories from Ellis Island?" Tobias Thornton stood by the window, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the late afternoon light streaming through the glass. He was older than she had expected, maybe 35 to her 26, with dark hair that showed traces of silver at the temples and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 untold stories. His tailored suit probably cost more than she made in 3 months. "I do," he said simply, turning to face her. His voice was deep, measured. "Your proposal caught my attention. These stories deserve to be told." Willa studied him carefully. In her 5 years of struggling to make meaningful documentaries, she had learned to be wary of money that came without strings. Why? Most investors want something flashy, something that will get them press. This is a niche historical project about people nobody remembers. Something flickered across his face, an emotion she could not quite name. Maybe that is exactly why it matters. She wanted to refuse on principle, to tell this mysterious millionaire that her art was not for sale. But the stack of overdue bills in her desk drawer and the eviction notice she had received last week made that impossible. "What do you want in return?" "Nothing." He moved closer, his presence somehow both commanding and careful, except perhaps the chance to watch you work. "I find your dedication compelling." 3 weeks later, Willa found herself in the New York Public Archives with Tobias standing beside her, his expensive leather shoes somehow perfectly at ease among the dusty boxes of century-old immigration records. He had shown up every single day since their agreement, never intrusive but always present, asking thoughtful questions and listening with an intensity that made her heart beat faster than she cared to admit. "Here," she said, pulling out a yellowed manifest from 1912. Maria Calabrese arrived from Naples with 3 children and no husband. The records show she started a bakery in Little Italy that supported 20 families during the Depression. Tobias leaned in to look, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and woodsy. "How did you find her story?" Her great-granddaughter wrote to me after seeing my last short film. She had boxes of letters, photographs, recipes written in Italian. Willa's eyes lit up as they always did when she talked about her work. "These people built everything we take for granted, and nobody knows their names." "You know them," Tobias said quietly. She looked up at him, startled by the raw emotion in his voice. "Someone should." He held her gaze for a long moment, and Willa felt something shift between them, like a door opening in a house she had thought was locked forever. Then he cleared his throat and stepped back. "I should let you work." But he did not leave, he never left. And despite her better judgment, Willa was beginning to realize she did not want him to. That evening, over coffee at a small cafe near her studio, Willa finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind since their first meeting. "Who are you really, Tobias? And do not tell me you are just a wealthy patron of the arts. Nobody gives away money like this without a reason." He was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. The cafe buzzed with evening conversations around them, but their corner table felt like an island. Finally, he set down his cup with careful precision. "I made my fortune in international shipping," he said. "Thornton Maritime, we operate cargo routes across every major ocean." Willa had heard of Thornton Maritime. Everyone had. It was one of the largest private shipping companies in the world. "That explains the money, it does not explain you." His jaw tightened. "What do you want to know? Why this project? Why me? Why do you look at those immigration records like they are going to tell you something you have been searching for your entire life?" Tobias looked out the window at the darkening street, and when he spoke, his voice was different, stripped of its usual careful control. "My grandfather came through Ellis Island in 1947. He was alone, 16 years old, with nothing but the clothes he wore and a name that was not really his. Willa's breath caught. What do you mean, not really his? He never told us his real name. He took the identity of a dead boy to get the papers he needed to enter the country. Tobias turned back to her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her chest tighten. I grew up knowing that everything we had, everything we were, was built on a lie. When he died 5 years ago, he gave me a letter. In it, he wrote that he had been running from something in the old country, something dangerous. He never said what. He never said who he really was. Oh, Tobias. Willa reached across the table without thinking, covering his hand with hers. He stared at their joined hands as if he had forgotten what human touch felt like. I have spent the last 5 years trying to find out the truth. Who was he? What was he running from? Did he have family that is still looking for him? I hired investigators, genealogists, researchers, nothing. It is like he appeared out of thin air. He laughed bitterly. And then I saw your proposal, this project about forgotten immigrants, and I thought maybe if I helped you tell their stories, I could somehow make peace with never knowing his. Willa tightened her grip on his hand. Maybe I can help you find him. His head snapped up. What? I have spent years learning how to trace immigrant histories through incomplete records. I have contacts in archives across Europe. If there is a trail, I can find it. She smiled at him, warm and genuine. But only if you stop hovering like some mysterious benefactor and actually work with me as a partner. Something in his expression cracked open, and for the first time since she had met him, Tobias Thornton smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. I can do that. They started meeting every evening after that, spreading documents and photographs across her studio floor, eating takeout from the Chinese restaurant downstairs, falling into the easy rhythm of two people who understood what it meant to care about stories that nobody else valued. Willa learned that Tobias was brilliant with logistics, organizing their research with the same precision he brought to running a shipping empire. He learned that she worked best after midnight, that she hummed old jazz standards when she was concentrating, and that she cried every single time she uncovered a photograph of immigrant children arriving at Ellis Island. "They look so brave," she said one night, wiping her eyes as she digitized a photo of a little girl clutching a rag doll. "So small and so brave." Tobias, who was cross-referencing passenger manifests on his laptop, looked up. In the soft glow of the desk lamp, with her dark hair falling out of its messy bun and her eyes bright with tears, she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Like you," he said without thinking. Willa's head turned sharply. "What?" He should have backtracked, should have made a joke, should have protected the careful professional distance they had been maintaining. Instead, he told the truth. "You are small and brave. You are fighting to keep these stories alive when the whole world tells you they do not matter. You are barely keeping this studio afloat, but you refuse to compromise your vision. That is brave." She set down the photograph with shaking hands. "Tobias, I know I should not say these things." He stood up, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I know you probably think I am just some rich man who does not understand real struggle. But, Willa, you have changed something in me. Before I met you, I was just going through the motions, running my company, searching for a dead man's secrets because it was easier than living my own life. You make me want to be present. You make me want to matter." Willa stood too, her heart pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "You do matter." "Do I?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I have built an empire, but what does it mean? Who does it help? You with your shoestring budget and your second-hand cameras, you are changing the world more than I ever have. Stop it." She crossed the space between them in 3 steps, and before she could second-guess herself, she reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "Stop diminishing yourself. You gave me the chance to finish this documentary. You have spent weeks helping me research, listening to me talk for hours about people you have never met. You are trying to honor your grandfather's memory in the only way you know how. That matters." He covered her hands with his eyes searching her face. Willa, I am falling for you. I have been falling since the moment you asked me why I wanted to fund your project because you did not trust easy money. I have been falling every time you laugh at something you found in the archives, every time you fight for these forgotten stories, every time you look at me like I am something more than my bank account. You are, she whispered. You are so much more. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home to a place she had never been before. His hands were gentle as they slid into her hair, tilting her face up to his, and she pressed closer, feeling the solid warmth of him, the racing of his heart that matched her own. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. I do not want to mess this up, he said quietly. I do not want you to ever feel like I am trying to control you or buy you or change you. Then do not, Willa said simply, just be with me. Be honest with me, that is all I need. It should have been simple after that, but life was never simple. 2 weeks later, Willa made a breakthrough in researching Tobias's grandfather. She found a reference in a Polish archive to a boy named Piotr Kaminski who had disappeared from a displaced persons camp in 1947, the same year Tobias's grandfather had arrived in America. The dates match, she said excitedly, pulling up documents on her computer. And look at this photograph from the camp records. Tobias stared at the grainy image of a teenage boy with his grandfather's eyes, his grandfather's stubborn chin. That is him, my God, that is him. Piotr Kaminski, Willa read from the notes. He was in the camp with his father, Jerzy Kaminski, and his younger sister, Zofia. According to this, the father died of pneumonia in the winter of 1946. There is no record of what happened to the sister. Tobias's hands clenched into fists. He had a sister, he never told us. Why would he never tell us? Willa continued reading, her excitement fading as she absorbed the information. Tobias, there is more. According to the camp administrator's notes, there was an incident. Someone from the Soviet occupation forces came looking for Piotr, claiming he had information about resistance activities. The next day, Piotr was gone. The sister was placed with a Catholic charity and sent to France. He was protecting her, Tobias said slowly. He disappeared so they would not use her to get to him. He gave up everything, including his own identity, to keep her safe. Willa reached for his hand. We can find her. If she went to France, there will be records. Church records, adoption records, immigration records if she moved again. We can find her. She would be in her 80s now, Tobias said, his voice rough with emotion. If she is even still alive, and even if we find her, what do I tell her? That her brother spent 70 years in America, became rich, had a family, and never once reached out to let her know he was alive. You tell her the truth, Willa said gently. That he loved her enough to disappear to protect her, that he carried that secret until he died. That his grandson cares enough about her to spend 5 years searching for answers. It took 3 months of painstaking research, working with archives in France, Poland, and eventually Canada. 3 months during which Willa's documentary took shape, her hours of interviews and historical footage weaving together into something powerful and true. 3 months during which she and Tobias grew closer, their relationship deepening from passionate new love into something steady and real. He stayed at her tiny apartment more nights than not, his expensive suits hanging incongruously next to her thrift store dresses. She met his friends from the business world and charmed them with her complete lack of interest in their money. He watched her work, marveling at her talent, and slowly began to believe that he might deserve the happiness she offered him. And then, finally, they found her. Zofia Kaminski had been adopted by a French family named Morau. She had moved to Montreal in 1965, married a teacher named Philippe Rousseau, and raised 3 children. She was 82 years old, and according to the woman Willa spoke with at the nursing home where she lived, still sharp as a tack. I do not know if I can do this, Tobias said as they sat in the rental car outside the nursing home. It was early spring, and Montreal was just beginning to thaw from winter's grip. What if she does not want to know? What if it hurts her more than it helps? Willa squeezed his hand. Then we will deal with that together. But Tobias, you have come this far. You owe it to your grandfather and to yourself to see this through. The nursing home was clean and bright, with cheerful staff and residents sitting in the common areas enjoying the afternoon sun. A nurse led them to a private room where an elderly woman sat in a chair by the window, a blanket over her lap, her white hair carefully styled. When she looked up at them, Tobias saw his grandfather's eyes looking back at him. "Madame Rousseau," Willa said gently. "My name is Willa Vincent and this is Tobias Thornton. We wrote to you about your brother." The woman's hands, gnarled with arthritis, gripped the arms of her chair. "Teodor," she whispered. "You found out about Teodor." "Yes, madam." Tobias moved closer, then knelt down so he was at her eye level. "Teodor Kaminsky was my grandfather. He came to America in 1947 and took the name Thomas Thornton. He died 5 years ago." Tears spilled down the woman's weathered cheeks. "I always wondered. For so many years I wondered if he was alive, if he was safe, if he thought of me. They told me he had run away from the camp, that he might be dead, but I never believed it. I always felt that he was out there somewhere." "He thought of you," Tobias said, his own voice breaking. "In the letter he left me, he said that leaving you was the hardest thing he ever did. But that men were looking for him, dangerous men, and he could not let them hurt you. He said he watched from a distance to make sure you got on the boat to France, and then he disappeared to draw them away from you." Zofia reached out with a trembling hand and touched Tobias's face. "You look like him, like my Teodor when he was young. Strong and serious, always trying to protect everyone. He was a good man," Tobias said. "He built a business, had a family, gave everything he could to make the world better, but he carried the weight of leaving you his entire life." "And I carried the weight of losing him," Zofia said softly. "But now you are here, his grandson. That means he had a life, a real life. That means it was not all for nothing." They spent hours with her that day and returned the next day and the day after that. Zofia told them stories of their childhood in Poland before the war, of their parents who had died in the chaos of the occupation, of the displaced persons camp, where Teodor had done everything he could to keep her fed and safe. She told them about the men in Soviet uniforms who had come asking questions about resistance fighters, about how Teodor had gone pale and told her to pack her things. They were going to get her somewhere safe. "He told me we would find each other again someday," she said, her voice distant with memory. "He said no matter how long it took, we would be together again. I suppose in a way we are through you." On their last day in Montreal, Zofia gave Tobias a small wooden box that she had kept for 75 years. Inside was a photograph of 2 children, a serious-faced boy of about 12 and a little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. "He made me promise to keep this safe," she said. "He said that no matter what happened, we had to remember who we were. Now I want you to have it. Remember who you come from, Tobias. Remember that your grandfather was brave enough to give up everything for love." On the flight back to New York, Tobias held the photograph carefully, staring at the image of 2 children who had survived things he could barely imagine. Willa sat beside him, her hand in his, letting him process everything in silence. Finally, as the plane began its descent, he spoke. "He taught me that love means sacrifice," Tobias said quietly. "He never told us the truth because he thought it would put us in danger. He carried that burden alone so we would not have to." "And now you know," Willa said. "Now you can honor him by living the life he wanted for you. Not one built on secrets and fear, but one built on truth and love." He turned to look at her, this incredible woman who had entered his life asking hard questions and refusing to accept easy answers. "You gave me this. You gave me back my family, my history. You gave me the truth." "We found it together," she corrected gently. "Willa." He set the photograph carefully in his lap and took both her hands in his. "I love you. I am in love with you. I want to build a life with you, the kind of life my grandfather dreamed of when he came to America. The kind of life where we do not have to hide who we are or where we come from. She kissed him there, 30,000 feet above the ground, surrounded by strangers, and it was perfect. I love you too. I have loved you since you stood in my office and asked for nothing but the chance to watch me work. I have loved you through every dusty archive, and every late night, and every moment you let me see past the walls you built around yourself. The documentary premiered 6 months later at a film festival in Manhattan. Willa had woven together dozens of immigrant stories, including Teodor Kaminski's, told through interviews with Zofia and historical records that Willa had painstakingly uncovered. The screening room was packed, and when the lights came up, there was not a dry eye in the house. Tobias watched from the back row as Willa took the stage for the question and answer session, fielding inquiries with passion and intelligence, her face glowing with the joy of knowing her work had connected with people. He thought about his grandfather, who had crossed an ocean alone to build a new life. He thought about all the forgotten people whose stories Willa had rescued from obscurity. He thought about how close he had come to spending his whole life going through the motions, never letting anyone close enough to matter. After the screening, after the congratulations and the business cards from potential distributors, and the celebration with her small crew, Tobias took Willa to the pier where his grandfather's first ship had docked in 1947. It was late, the city lights reflecting off the dark water, the autumn wind sharp with the promise of winter. I have been thinking, he said, pulling her close against the cold. My grandfather started with nothing and built an empire because he wanted to create something that mattered, something that would last. But an empire is not what matters. This is what matters. He gestured at the water, the city, the infinite possibility of the night, stories, connections, truth. You showed me that, Tobias. Willa looked up at him, her heart in her throat. He pulled a small box from his pocket, and even in the dim light, she could see his hands shaking. I want to spend my life helping you tell stories that matter. I want to wake up next to you every morning and listen to you talk about forgotten people who changed the world. I want to have children someday and tell them about their great-great-grandfather who was brave enough to start over, and about their mother who was brave enough to make sure the world remembered. He opened the box, revealing a simple ring with a single perfect diamond. Willa Vincent, will you marry me? She was crying and laughing and nodding all at once. Yes, God, yes, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger with hands that were no longer shaking, and when he kissed her, it felt like a promise, like a beginning, like coming home. They were married the following spring in a small ceremony at the nursing home in Montreal, with Zofia sitting in the front row, crying happy tears and telling anyone who would listen that her Teodor would have loved this, would have been so proud. Willa wore a simple white dress and carried wildflowers, and Tobias wore his grandfather's watch and cufflinks. They said their vows in English and Polish, honoring the past while promising themselves to the future. The documentary won awards and was picked up by a major streaming service, introducing millions of people to the forgotten immigrants who had built America. Willa used the money to start a nonprofit dedicated to preserving immigrant histories, with Tobias handling the business side while she focused on the storytelling. They bought a brownstone in Brooklyn with enough room for an editing studio and a library for research and bedrooms that they hoped would one day be filled with children. Zofia came to visit twice a year, regaling them with more stories about Teodor, slowly piecing together the full picture of a boy who had survived war and displacement and loss to become a man who built something good. On her 85th birthday, surrounded by her own children and grandchildren along with Tobias and Willa, she raised a glass of wine and said, "To Teodor, who taught us that the bravest thing you can do is love someone enough to let them go, and that the most beautiful thing is when love brings you back together." 2 years into their marriage, Willa discovered she was pregnant. She told Tobias on a cold winter evening, much like the one when they had first kissed in her studio. He cried, something she had seen him do only a handful of times, and held her like she was something precious and breakable. "We are going to be parents," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are," she confirmed, her hands on her still flat stomach. "Are you scared?" "Terrified," he admitted. "But also more certain than I have ever been about anything. We are going to give this child the thing that matters most: truth. Love, stories, a sense of where they come from and who they can become." Their daughter was born in early autumn, with Tobias's dark hair and Willa's bright, curious eyes. They named her Teodora Zofia Thornton, honoring both the past and the future. Zofia, now 87 and still sharp as ever, held the baby and wept, saying it was like being given back a piece of the brother she had lost so long ago. As Willa recovered from the birth, Tobias sat beside her hospital bed, holding their sleeping daughter, and thought about the journey that had brought him here. From a man haunted by secrets and afraid to let anyone close, to a husband and father who understood that the greatest gift was not the empire he had built, but the love he had found with a documentary filmmaker who refused to let stories be forgotten. "What are you thinking?" Willa asked sleepily. He looked at his wife, bruised and exhausted and more beautiful than ever, and at the tiny person cradled in his arms. "I am thinking that my grandfather was right. Sometimes you have to cross an ocean and become someone new to find the life you were meant to live, but he was also wrong. You do not have to do it alone. You do not have to keep secrets to protect the people you love. Sometimes the secrets, when you finally share them, when you finally trust someone with the whole truth, that is what makes the bond unbreakable." Willa reached for his hand, her ring catching the light. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you, of us, of this." "I think he would," Tobias agreed. "I think he would say that every sacrifice, every hard choice, every lonely year was worth it if it led to this, to family, to truth, to love." Little Teodora stirred in his arms, making a tiny sound of contentment, and Tobias felt something settle in his chest, a peace he had been searching for his entire life without knowing it. The secrets that had haunted him, that had defined his family for generations, had not destroyed them. Instead, they had led him to Willa, to this moment, to a future full of possibility. Outside the hospital window, New York City glittered in the darkness, full of millions of stories waiting to be told, millions of secrets waiting to be uncovered, millions of people searching for connection and truth and love. And in that small room, holding his daughter and his wife's hand, Tobias Thornton understood that he had found everything that mattered. Years later, when Teodora was old enough to ask questions, they would tell her about her great-great-grandfather who crossed an ocean alone, about the great-aunt who waited 75 years to learn what happened to her brother, about the documentary filmmaker and the shipping magnate who fell in love while searching for truth. They would teach her that secrets kept out of fear only create distance, but secrets revealed with trust create bonds that nothing can break. But for now, in this moment, there was only love. The kind of love that had survived war and displacement and decades of separation. The kind of love that had brought together two people who seemed to have nothing in common but who understood each other perfectly. The kind of love that said no matter what darkness came before, there was always the possibility of light. Tobias kissed his wife's forehead, adjusted his daughter's blanket, and silently thanked his grandfather for being brave enough to start over, for teaching him through his secrets and sacrifices what it truly meant to love someone enough to change your whole world for them. And he thanked Willa for seeing past the walls he had built, for refusing to accept his money without understanding his heart, for showing him that the stories we tell and the truths we share are what make us human. As the night deepened and the hospital quieted and his family slept, Tobias made a promise to the grandfather he had never stopped loving and the daughter who would carry his name forward. He promised that this child and any children who came after would grow up knowing exactly who they were and where they came from. They would know that their family's strength came not from wealth or power, but from the courage to be vulnerable, to tell the truth, and to let love in even when it was terrifying. The secrets that had once threatened to define them had instead strengthened them, just as pressure transforms carbon into diamond. And in learning to trust each other with those secrets, Tobias and Willa had built something that would last far longer than any empire, something that would echo through generations. They had built a love story worth remembering,